The most impressive performance in America's Funniest Woman's career was recently given. Astonished stillness fell over the studio audience. Everyone on the crew was trying not to cry. It would be hailed as television gold by critics. Completion would be followed by awards. But before leaving the stage, CarolBurnett made a solemn vow to herself. That episode would never be shown to her. Never, ever, ever. That vow has been kept by her for 47 years. The successful comedian couldn't stand to look at herself in that one honest moment because it would have destroyed her career. Brutal honesty that demolished everything her program stood for. No jokes, no funny voices, just heartbreaking honesty. What occurred in those brief moments in 1977 that remained etched in the memory of America's beloved for the remainder of her life? Why would someone who has spent their whole life finding humor in tragedy finally come up with anything too much to handle? It all starts with a childhood that would have shattered the will of most people long before they had the ability to dream. In San Antonio, Texas, a little girl waits at the window for the arrival of friends, or, more likely, strangers, in her family's home. Parents whose drinking has gotten the best of them to the point where they have neglected their daughter. There is no humor in CarolBurnett's story in the outset. Silence is the first sound. An enveloping stillness that permeates a home when grown-ups have made the decision to bottles while listening to bedtime stories. A youngster discovers that hiding from the world can be the best way to stay safe at times. Her dad had trouble keeping a permanent job since his hands shook too much, so he worked here and there at the movie theater. Emotionally distant even as she floated through life, her mother was mired in a cloud of shattered promises and sour dreams. During the time of actual presence, ultimately, both would succumb to their addictions, leaving behind a sense of abandonment that would trouble Carol for years to come. The incredible thing about people is their perseverance, though. It manages to stay alive no matter how dire the situation. Carol had already found something profound by the time she was a toddler, that even a little burst of laughter could alleviate the worst of feelings. After her parents abandoned all attempts at parenting, Carol discovered a source of redemption that she hadn't imagined. Mabel, her grandma, white-whisked her away from Texas's mayhem and dropped her off in Hollywood. However, they were not greeted with a red carpet. Surrounded by society's lost souls, they instead found themselves in a single small room in a rundown boarding house. Only $20 a month allowed them to stay afloat. This week, they stole toilet paper from movie theaters since they couldn't even afford to purchase it. Motivated by sheer need rather than greed. Something mystical took place, nevertheless, within those falling walls. It was Carol who uncovered might end up being both her greatest strength and her worst weakness. Being able to find happiness even when faced with adversity. Karen, her made-up twin sister, was her creation. Karen exemplified all that Carol lacked. Beautiful, self-assured, and always smiling. Because of Carol, even the desperate grown-ups in their vicinity believed Karen because she made her so real. It was true that she was there. As soon as she reached the top of the fire escape, she would change into her Karen costume and hairstyle. Endearing and carefree. This was no laughing matter. This was Carol's initial performance masterclass, and it taught her that being someone else is sometimes what other people need. Someone else's suffering in order to temporarily escape their own. However, Carol's favorite way to escape was to go to the movies with her grandma every Saturday for 50 cents. Up to 10% of their weekly salary. Amidst the shadows, Carol had the opportunity to disregard the squawking and paint peeling. Carol heard a word that would alter the course of her life at one of those dim theaters where life shimmered, stars danced, and lovers kissed. Carol was struck like a bolt of lightning by the reverberation of Johnny Weissmuller's iconic Tarzan cry. When she got home, she started imitating the sound religiously, honing each note and rhythm to perfection. Developing the kind of control over her breath that takes most singers years to acquire is something she had no clue she was doing while honing her voice. She regarded it as merely a game. But that outburst would subsequently elicit laughs and applause from audiences. One of her earliest comedic weapons evolved from a desperate attempt at mimicking when she was a child. CarolBurnett had mastered life's most crucial lesson by the age of 7. As a protective barrier, laughter fended off a resolve to crush her will. Little did she know that that very shield would become too much for her to bear in due time. Carol, in her youth, had no idea the strain that would be put on that shield. Carol had this one aspiration that seemed both unattainable and inevitable as she neared the end of her high school career: journalism. Because Carol's mother had always aspired to be a writer, she felt a strong sense of responsibility to fulfill her ambition. Despite her aspirations, she was confronted with a harsh reality when the time came to enroll in UCLA. The $50 required for tuition was out of her possession. The dream would have ended for the majority of people. It appeared like way for some time. After that, a remarkable event transpired. A complete stranger, the identity of whom Carol was never informed, came forward and paid the precise amount that was required. Free of charge. Rigorous funding to alter her course of life irrevocably. No other details provided. Unfortunately, Carol's intentions to study journalism at UCLA were thwarted. She had her entire world turned upside down by a single elective theater class. She felt a deep connection in that classroom. She had overcome her shyness, poverty, and invisibility. She sounded lively, entertaining, and full of life. The gamble of changing my degree paid off in no time. She was recognized as the most promising student in UCLA's theater program at the conclusion of her first year. It became more than a mere designation. It confirmed that her pursuit of this seemingly unachievable aim was not insane. Unexpectedly, though, Carol got her biggest break. She was at a San Diego party, stuffing herself while working as an usherette for 65 cents an hour. Puts the groceries in her bag to deliver to Grandma. A stranger with sharp clothes came up to her at that moment. It wasn't his calling. He was a shipbuilder from La Jolla who became a wealthy. He made Carol an enticingly good-sounding offer when she revealed her ambition of making it big on Broadway in New York. To the truth, Don Soyan, her boyfriend, and she both received $1,000. Only 3 things: keep his identity a secret at all times, proceed solely to New York with the funds. Additionally, achieving success included assisting others in reaching their goals. He preferred to remain anonymous. He merely mentioned that he was repaying a favor from someone who had helped him in the past. After Carol and Dawn had saved $2,000, they left UCLA. They were going east. Carol had never left Texas, but that didn't stop her. Felt no need to make friends in New York because she was alone. After the fact, she clarified that she hadn't learned enough to be afraid. Suddenly, the funds began to vanish at an alarming rate. While on a collect call, Carol's loved ones pleaded with her to return, and she eventually broke down in tears. Home. A life-altering radio broadcast came just as she was about to give up. Carol, the hurricane, was making its way up the coast. It was a sign, she thought, and it encouraged her to keep going after her goals. An historic boarding house for young women attempting to make it big in the arts. The rehearsal club was her next stop. Carol shared a room with 3 other actresses and paid $18 a week for a cot. Even though there was just a single closet and bathroom, she thought it was heaven on earth. Something very out of the ordinary gave her her first major break. An ode to the United States Secretary of State, the stern and extremely solemn John Foster Dulles. Carol had such a natural talent for performing this ridiculous humor song that it became her hallmark piece. Wild applause ensued. Both the Jack Show and the Ed Sullivan Show invited her to appear on their shows. Her knees trembling, she stepped out onto the stage at Sullivan. However, the audience was in fits of laughter by the time her set was over. And Carol and Dawn repaid the entire $2,000 precisely 5 years after they received the enigmatic loan. Even in the end, the millionaire remained unknown and never reacted. Carol, however, was only at the start of her success. She was laying the groundwork, transforming suffering into triumph, transforming her weakness into strength. She would quickly become one of the most famous television stars of all time. Unbeknownst to her, this very ability would eventually compel her to face an unbearably terrible reality. When you're in the entertainment industry, your success can skyrocket faster than you ever imagined. The debut of the CarolBurnett Show was the pinnacle of this acceleration for Carol. It was that night that television history was made. 30 million viewers tuned in week after week to see Carol and her company perform magic for 11 consecutive seasons. Those were more than just high marks. A cultural phenomenon, this was. But here is the part that really set it apart. Despite the male-dominated nature of the television industry, CarolBurnett broke barriers when she hosted her own primetime variety show. The glass ceiling wasn't the only obstacle she had to overcome. She broke it entirely. There was strategy behind the show's success. Carol had put together an ideal team that seemed to have a magical connection. With his background in theater and amazing timing, Harvey Korman was a huge asset. Comedy royalty Vicki Lawrence began her career when she was a teenager. Not to mention Tim Conway. In his costume, Conway embodied controlled chaos. Except for one rule, he was unyielding. Rehearsals are not the place to let loose. He utterly confused everyone else by saving his most hilarious bits for the live tapings. This ensured that each performance was unique and full of energy. During the now famous elephant fable, the most famous example occurred. With an A. Continuing with his lengthy and absurd story about a circus elephant, Conway began rambling on in this sketch from their regular family series. Carol, Vicki, and Harvey did their best to maintain their characters, but the plot just got wilder and funnier. Towards the conclusion, even Vicki Lawrence utterly lost it. Everyone on set, including Conway, couldn't help but laugh as she retaliated with a very unexpected line. The show's heart and soul were moments like those. Honest, genuine, and totally unrehearsed. Many accolades were bestowed. It won 25 Emmys on the show. Carol received many Golden Globes for herself. Beyond its entertainment value, the show had a profound impact on subsequent works. The origins of sketch comedy on Saturday Night Live may be traced back to Carol's show. The family sketches, though, were both the most distinctive and the most intricate recurring part of the show. The character of Eunice Higgins, a lady burdened with lethargic ambitions and letdowns, was portrayed by Carol. Comedic dysfunction was a common theme in these sketches, which managed to be both funny and disturbing at the same time. Intriguing things. Feeling like life had slipped away from her at all times, Eunice was irritable and resentful. Though humorous on the surface, the figure had a tragic backstory that Carol could relate to. For a long time, these drawings skillfully navigated the space between dramatic and comedic elements. The audience found humor in Eunice's plight, but they also felt empathy for her plight. She spoke to everyone who has ever felt trapped or questioned the validity of their aspirations, which is why the character struck a chord. However, as the program approached its 10th year, Carol and the writers made the decision to push that threshold to new heights. Together, they devised a sketch that would push Carol to her comedic, broadcast, and endurance limitations. They lacked. Carol would be plagued with the sense that they were about to concoct something incredibly powerful and disastrous. Only a few weeks remained until the performance that would cause her to swear off watching it ever again. What happens when a person whose whole profession is based on alleviating suffering turns? When joy meets anguish that is too profound to change, what happens next? It was going to be the most public method for CarolBurnett to find out. This family portrait was the first of its kind that the authors had created. Carol and Eunice Higgins were featured on The Gong Show. Took herself into uncharted land. Eunice gets into a low-rent talent show in the sketch because she thinks that performing on TV will give her the break she's always wanted. It's the kind of setup that could have taken 100 hilarious turns. However, a decision was taken by the writers that would alter the course of events. There should be no humor, accent, or over-the-top actions. Just a lady, hopeless and naive, holding on to the hope that this very second might prove her worth. The foundation of Carol's work was her ability to see the humor in, on turning sorrow into mirth, in the dark. However, no change would occur this time. The agony would be pain this time. Taking the stage as Eunice, Carol strolled onto that platform for the camera to capture the talent show. And a change occurred. In the studio, viewers were treated to something very different than what they had anticipated: laughs. No, this was not humorous. Millions of people watched as this surgeon worked without numbing the patient. The voice of Eunice was filled with a desperate hope as she poured her soul into a performance, fully believing it would transform her life. Alan Luton, a real-life game show host, presided over the judges' reaction. Their criticisms undermined her rather than bolstering her. Their comments on her looks, voice, and aspirations were disparaging. Their laughter mocked her. The world's habit of making fun of Eunice and others like her. The camera caught every nuance of Carol's facial reaction. She looks at him with a faint hope. The epiphany that she had been the deceitful one. Finally, her soul was crushed under the weight of a lifetime of letdowns. Next thing anyone knew, the lights went out in the studio. As Eunice sat contemplatively on stage by herself, the camera gradually retreated. Her face contorted with tears. There is only a distraught woman and her own tears. There is no music, no punchline, and no rescue. The studio audience was at a loss for words. Despite their expectations of a comedic show, what they experienced felt more like a documentary. Comedy routine. In utter shock, the team rose to their feet. A lot of people were trying to hold back their own emotions. However, Carol felt the effects the strongest. She got down from the stage as soon as the cameras stopped rolling and vowed to herself that, for 47 years, she has been held. She has no interest in seeing that show. Never, ever, ever. Years down the road, she'd shed light on why the anguish was so genuine. She claimed she could relate to Eunice's grief, for the simple reason that it was. Carol had endured ridicule and rejection as a child due to her impoverished background and seemingly unachievable aspirations. She was familiar with the feeling of having such a strong desire for something that one would give up all for the opportunity of it. Every time someone told her, "You're not good enough, not pretty enough, not talented enough," she felt the weight of the statement sink in. The sketch didn't merely depict Eunice's demise. Each and every one of Carol's broken moments was displayed, complemented with an astonishingly brilliant 7-minute performance that would be acclaimed as television brilliance. The reviewers all agreed in the compliments they received. Then came the awards. An ideal fusion of comedy and drama, the show proved that television could be art. It was titled groundbreaking, revolutionary. None of that was visible to Carol, though. She was blinded by her own suffering. In high definition, seen to millions of viewers who were unaware they were witnessing the real-life anguish of a person. That incident has been in a place Carol won't go for 47 years. It has always been there, ready to confront her, but she has never done so. After a long career of finding humor in tragedy, the lady eventually made something that was too honest, too raw, and too real to watch. Possibly the strongest evidence of her talent is that the most challenging performances might often be the ones that push us to our limits. Anyone familiar with Carol's story may see the irony. Here was a lady who had managed to pull herself up after facing desolation, destitution, and total abandonment, who has managed to make a joke out of every tragedy and a triumph out of every defeat. Still, the thought of having even 7 minutes of her own honesty recorded on film. She managed to dodge that one performance, but life continued to throw her curveballs. Carrie, her daughter, would struggle with addiction beginning when she was 13 years old. The demons that tore Carol's parents apart were disturbingly identical to those her child would face. Carol battled for Carrie just as fiercely as she had for her profession. One of her guiding principles is that in order to truly love someone, you must be willing to endure their hatred. After Carrie got sober, she and Carol grew even closer. They collaborated on a Broadway musical titled Hollywood Arms, which was based on Carol's youth. However, tragedy struck once again when Carrie passed away at the young age of 38 from pneumonia brought on by lung cancer. Carol was heartbroken. However, she persevered and completed the piece. It was Carrie's fault. She made the claim. The trend persisted when Erin, Carol's youngest daughter, too battled addiction. Carol took custody of her grandson Dylan once more at the age of 87. For 3 generations, the lady who had begun life unwanted had been the linchpin. CarolBurnett is still going strong at 91 years old, working, performing, and making people laugh. Her recent appearances on Palm Royale and Better Call Saul demonstrate that ability remains constant regardless of one's age. But that incident is still unbeatable, even after 7 decades of performances. She gave it away, and now it's lost in the archives, like a fragment of her soul. With just one airing, the program revolutionized television. It demonstrated that viewers were ready for comic shows to tackle heavier topics, and that they wanted more authenticity. As a result, opportunities for shows that would manage to combine comedy with tragedy in ways that, prior to Carol's demonstration, were unattainable. Yet, the individual price was rather high. Carol has described the sketch as both important and devastating in interviews that have taken place over the years. It made her happy, she states, since it was significant and based on truth. Unfortunately, she discovered that the cost of telling the truth is often too great to bear. Carol still refuses to face the truth about her performance, no matter what. She has triumphed on stages all across the globe. She has won every possible honor and her talent has touched the lives of millions. However, that 7-minute sketch is located in a place she is unable to access. Perhaps it's acceptable. Perhaps the artist intended for some works of art to be too overwhelming for them to handle. Perhaps it's because Carol is unable to observe it as evidence of its authenticity. The once-a-week program has had a lasting impact on both comedy and drama since it aired 47 years ago. But it's still a door that CarolBurnett locked behind her. A place in her mind where she is never truly prepared to step foot. The last one might be that insight from Carol's extraordinary narrative. Giving something of oneself that you can't get back can be the most creative act. In order to make other people laugh, you have to face realities that are too heavy to bear alone. Moreover, there are instances when an unstageable performance is the most impactful. Watch it all over again.